Good evening. Thanks very much for your time. So tell us, what is it that seems to be distinguishing ACSA from the rest of state-owned enterprises?
Good evening, Vuyo. Well, I cannot speak on behalf of other state-owned companies because what we are privy to in terms of the goings on there is what is in the public domain. Therefore, we cannot give an objective view based on...
Talk about yourself. Talk about the
let's
things
talk
that
about us.
you are doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we run quite a tight ship, supported by a staff complement of people who are not only loyal, but are committed to the business. And what we did is in 2015, we embarked on a journey to review our business operating model and to introduce a new governance framework. And at that time, it was preemptive. We were not in any trouble, but we thought for the long-term sustainability of the business and to support our Vision 2025 strategy, we had to start with that. And I think that has provided us a level of cushion in terms of sustaining the business and making sure that we continue to pay dividends to our shareholders.
What exactly do you mean when you say you're running a tight ship?
Now, the first thing that we did in terms of our governance framework and operating model was to make sure that we introduce governance levels, which will make sure that we separate or we segregate powers in terms of, number one, the awarding of bids where tenders are related. Therefore, there isn't a single person at ACSA who has the sole power or discretion to award bids. There are various committees that were set up to make sure that powers are segregated. That was the first. Secondly, we had to make sure that we remove, especially people with decision-making powers from making decisions on bids, because we know that supply chain management in most companies is the most vulnerable area for opportunistic people or business people to have an entry into the business. And also we've cleaned up our environment internally to tighten our internal processes and procedure, because even if when people come from outside, they need internal people to work with them to get access to resources in an unfair or a fraudulent manner. So that's what we focused on. Secondly, we reorganized ourselves in such a way that we would be able to grow our footprint outside of the South African borders so that we can enhance our investments, equity investments, and revenues. So we set up new divisions whose sole purpose is to do business development and to offer technical and advisory services. And all that was based on the back of the success that we've seen in terms of our own infrastructure development since we were formed 26 years ago.
Well, I mean, people who know a lot about numbers say that given the size of your business and the prime position that you are in, you should be making a lot more money than you actually made, that the profit you made was actually modest.
In fact, the profit we made was quite disappointing because our profit was down 59% from the previous year. However, our revenue had increased to 7.1 billion, which was a 5.6% increase, but we experienced cost pressures insofar as our staff costs are concerned and our security costs. And the reason for the staff costs is purely linked to the operating model and the introduction of these new divisions who, in the near term or in the medium term, should be able to then fetch additional revenue from diversified sources of revenue, and that should see our revenue line increasing to be able to absorb the staff costs. In terms of security costs, we've seen a 50% increase in security costs, and that was due to complying with civil aviation regulations and making sure that there's heightened security at our airports to ensure the safety of our passengers and stakeholders.
So it's not because we're stealing more?
No, it's not that, but we cannot preclude that because any business is susceptible to fraud and corruption. However, like I said, we've put governance processes in place and we've made sure that we tighten our supply chain management environment.
Do you think that you would be in the position you are in if you went a monopoly?
I've seen that in the headlines to say we enjoy this kind of success because we're a monopoly, a state-owned monopoly. However, our sister companies who are also state-owned are on their knees given their monopolistic status as well. So it doesn't only have to do with monopoly status, it has to do with the efficient and effective running of a company.
But how do you leverage on your status, which is a fact, you are a monopoly, but how do you leverage? In other words, what are the things that you do that which other state-owned enterprises that are monopolies aren't doing?
Like I said earlier, first we identified opportunities to expand our business beyond the borders of South Africa. And remember, once we're outside the country, there's no monopoly there. We have to compete with international airport authorities as well. So, and that has allowed us to diversify our revenue, making sure that we bring in more profits into the country.
So that's what gives you resilience, you reckon?
It gives us a competitive edge as well.
Where to from here?
So we are embarking on a capital expansion program for all our 9 airports across the country, but most notably will be with Cape Town, where we will be building a new realigned runway. We will be building a new international terminal because we're having pressure there in terms of constraints. And then lastly, in Cape Town, we'll be reconfiguring our domestic arrivals terminal. As you know, that access from the air bridges, you have to walk all around the terminal to get to your luggage and out into landside. However, we're going to open up that space for ease of access, whether for people who directly need to go to airside or for those passengers who need to collect their luggage. They don't have to walk as far. And then with OR Tambo, we're working on a new cargo terminal, midfield cargo terminal. The design work is already underway for that. And we will be building new remote apron stands. And also we're building a mixed commercial development, which is called the Western Precinct.
2 things. One, where's the money going to come from?
So there's 2
you need to raise money.
Yes, there's 2 sources of money. And because we have managed to follow a very aggressive debt redemption strategy over the past 6 years. We have seen our debt decrease from 17 billion to 6.6 billion in the previous financial year. And that has allowed us to build up reserves. So some of it will be self-funded, and we will go out to markets next year to raise 4.6 billion.
I'm sure you've had people complaining about how expensive it is to park at the airport, for example.
Yes.
Is that going to change anytime soon? Or is it going to get worse?
Well, there's something I need to demystify here in terms of our parking tariffs. Like with any other convenient offering or convenient product, the more convenient it is, the more expensive it becomes. So at the airport...
Does it have to be like that, though?
At the airport, the closer you park to the terminal building, the more expensive it is. But the further away you park, the cheaper it becomes. So what I'd encourage you to do is to actually pre-book your parking on our website so that you get discounted rates, and also you can identify areas where you can pay much less, up to 50% less than what you would pay if you were to park closer to the terminal building.
Okay, so we're going to leave it this evening. Thanks very much for coming through.
Thank you.
Well, ACSA's Corporate Affairs Executive, Arifenze Shinas.